Chris de Burgh first came to prominence with his second album, Spanish Train and Other Stories, in 1975. The title song about the Lord and the devil playing poker and chess, with, of course, the devil cheating, was even banned in some countries. Then there was the salacious Patricia the Stripper. And then a song that became a holiday favorite, A Spaceman Came Traveling. By 1981, there was the single Waiting for the Hurricane, an extra track off his best of Best Moves. It showed a more commercial side of Chris de Burgh. By 1982, he had 5 singles off The Getaway, including the hit Don't Pay the Ferryman, about a boat captain who may or may not be the Grim Reaper. And 2 albums later came his big tune, 1986, the album Into the Light, and a worldwide hit smash, Lady in Red. His new project is The Legend of Robin Hood, featuring the music that's soon to be featured in a musical. It's a reimagined tale of the fabled folklore favorite, and it's available now.
You know, I'm 61, and I'm looking at the end. I have to. I'm working harder than I've ever worked. I'm telling you this for a reason. But being 61, it's made me, I think I'm on top of my game as a broadcaster after 38 years, and I'm paying attention. I'm working smarter. I'm listening to this album. You know, I'd heard your latest stuff, and I love it too. And I've been following you from Spanish Train way back when. But it's amazing listening to this project, this huge project, advantageous, just a wonderful thing. Does it stun you sometimes that the songs are still coming out of you like this?
Nicely put. Thank you so much for that. You know, John, it's a strange thing being a creative person, because I was asked recently who would I like to interview most of all, and I said, well, I think probably somebody like Stevie Wonder, because the talent that man has is so enormous. And then people look at me sometimes. You mentioned Spanish Train. Some people say, how the hell did you come up with that? And for me, it was kind of perfectly natural. Okay, it was lots of hard work and a bit of, you know, working things out. But so it's the same thing when it comes to The Legend of Robin Hood or Moonfleet, which is another big, long story. All in one album.
Yeah, Moonfleet helped you do this, right? The fact that you gained a structure, right?
Yeah. I had for Moonfleet, because it was a book, it was an existing book that I absolutely adored. I had a huge piece of paper saying, "This is what happens here. John Trenchard finds the ghost of Blackbird here, and this is what happens, and this is where the boy gets shot, and blah blah blah." But with this one, it started because I was asked by a group of people who've already mounted 8 successful musicals in Germany in a place called Fulda, a town I know very well. It's beautiful, and they asked me to become involved with a musical with them project, Robin Hood. They said, we know you brought up in a castle, you have an interest in medieval history, you have an ancestor called Hubert de Burgh, who was the chief lawmaker to King John and King Richard back in the same sort of time when Robin Hood was allegedly around. And so the whole thing sounded good. We were supposed to have a world premiere last year, this year, next year it'll come out. So I wrote 8 songs for that. And the idea then came to me, why not? Also, incidentally, I was very much involved with the story of that, working with other writers, working what happened next and so on. So I thought, why not write my own album? Imagine that it's being performed in a tavern in the 18th century. The straw bales, people have got tankards of beer, and a group of musicians and poets and dancers go up on the stage and they tell the story. That's in Moonfleet, I had a narrator doing that, but this one, I wanted to do something different, to have these guys. So when we come into concerts in Canada, which will hopefully be in May next year, April and May, in your part of the world in, I believe, early May, then I have the chance to tell the story and explain, because I don't know if you have any children, John, but if you have kids or tell a child a story, the children are doing this. They're imagining. They're not staring at the storyteller. They're imagining, and that's what I love to do, is create the imagination of these things going on in your head.
You know what? Going through this journey, and I mean, being a prog fan, I remember hearing things like Spanish Train. When I heard that, I remember thinking, all my proggers friends will love this kind of stuff, because it's a journey. And this album to me is obviously, it's a journey, but did you feel a sense of responsibility? You know, having a blank piece of paper in front of you is one thing, writing your own songs, but then you've got this big legend thing that's grown, as you said in the EPK video, it's grown bigger and bigger. Did you feel any pressure?
To a certain extent, but you know what? I believe that if you stopped 100 people in the street, at social distancing, of course, and you asked them about Robin Hood, they will always come up with this one: rob from the rich, gave to the poor. And now, whether he did or even existed, maybe he robbed from the rich and kept it for himself. Nobody knows. But it's a lovely idea, and it's one that's persisted through history for 800 years. They would mention Marion. They would mention possibly the outlaws and Sherwood Forest and the horrible, the sheriff of Nottingham. That's about it. But within that story, there's an encapsulation that you've got to adhere to. You've got to stay close to. For me, in the album, one of the top key points is when Robin and Marion finally consummate their marriage with that song, "I'm Falling in Love All Over Again." Because listen, I'm going to take you on an imagination story. Imagine what's happened is the wedding. And by the way, I must tell you that I've also written a book about the story, what's going on in here. And I've also narrated it myself, putting on the voices. For example, we're at the wedding feast, and Robin is drunk, completely out of his head, and he's 19 and an obnoxious teenager, and Marion is 13, and they do not want to get married to each other. They scarcely know each other. It's an arranged marriage between two dynasties to expand, the power of both of them. And then we have the father. There's a big wedding feast going on, and the father stands up and he says, "And now I call upon my son Robin to say a few words for the distinguished guests here today." And Robin says, "I don't want to." Anyway, so there's a bit of a fracas. And then he is supposed to go and do his marital duty upstairs. And he goes upstairs. And so imagine there's a four-poster bed. He has a candle lights. And he's standing beside the bed, just shaking with fear, wearing a white nightdress, is Marion. Only 13, for God's sake. And he looks at her, and then he sits down. And he thinks, "I can't do this. This is not me." And he sobers up immediately. And he shows a compassionate and kind side of his personality that persists through his life. And he goes up to her finally, and he holds her in his arms until she stops shaking. He says, "It's okay. I'm not going to harm you." And they talk through the night, and she really begins to warm to this young man. He sleeps on the floor on a bunch of furs. And in the morning, he slips up and leaves her without saying a word. And imagine then she hears hoofbeats on the drawbridge, and she runs to the window, and there he is riding away to join the crusade. And she shouts, "Robin, Robin, thank you." And then, "I love you." And all this stuff is in this audiobook, which is incidentally available on Amazon and Spotify and various places, to expand the story in the same way reading a book and then going to an album that tells the story.
Yeah. Well, like for instance, Open Your Eyes, which is, you can, if you think you can, make a difference. Where you had said in the video that he decided to live a better life, a conscious decision, a fork in the road, changing the trajectory of your life. That's a big moment for anybody.
It's a big moment. This is probably the second most important moment in the whole story, because he's come back from the Crusades. He's been sent there with a bishop's blessing that they'll all be heroes, and it's all about money and murdering the Muslims. So comes back, and he's like so many young men coming, even these days, what we call now post-traumatic stress disorder. Young men who've seen things and they've done things absolutely horrific that no young man ever should have to do. And he goes and lives in the woods. And one day, Marion comes to find him with a couple of the men who's fought with him in the Crusades, and says, "You've got to come and see what's going on here." And he says, "Not interested. Go away. I don't want to talk to you." But she says, "No, you must." He says, "No, it's not my business." And she says, "Well, it is your business. You're the Earl of Huntingdon. You can change things." And he keeps persisting. He says, "No, leave me alone." And finally, one of the other two soldiers says, "Look, we fought together outside the walls of Jerusalem. Please come with us." And reluctantly, that's the key point, he goes to a local village, and then he sees the desperate poverty and what the king's taxation has done to the poor people. And that is the switch in his head. He goes, "Right, I'm going to do something about this." And that is the key point. And that is a challenge. We're not born heroes. There's no such thing, but we are put in a situation. You and I don't know what we would do if, for example, like the two young men who were walking across Westminster Bridge in London last year, and a young girl fell in the water. Both of them stripped off their clothes and jumped in. instantly. I don't know if I would have had the courage. One of them died and drowned, and the other saved the girl. Now, that for me is instant courage, instant heroism. Long-term heroism is, I would believe, this girl, Greta Thunberg, who was, as a schoolgirl, said, I've had enough of this global warming crisis created by our forefathers and our ancestors and our parents, grandparents. I want to do something about it. And she's been vilified, but she's become a heroine for millions of young people who, it's their world, and that's for me is a hero.
I was just watching a video of her last night. It came on MSNBC of her dancing at that. And I remember going, oh yeah, I forgot she's a little girl. I forgot that she's just a young girl, because she was acting her age, where I look at her as an adult. Okay, the Robin Hood, on this album, that picture you painted, you're sitting across the table from him. What would you ask him? What would you want to know from him?
I would ask him, what was it that transformed you from an ordinary young man into a robber? And what made you have the courage to go out and, in my story, for example, he robs a guy coming back with taxation money, going for the sheriff and the king in the forest. That's one thing. And then he goes to, at night, he turns up in a moneylender's bedroom and holds the point of a knife against his throat and says, you have been extorting money from all these poor people with extortionate rates. I'm taking all of it, but you keep some of it, what you think is fair, and I'm taking the rest of it to give back to the people you took it from. And I would say, what made you into that person? Because I couldn't have done that. And you knew the danger you were getting into. You knew that sooner or later, the sheriff and the king of England were going to hunt you down. And that's what I would like to ask him.
Yeah. Listen, again, I was a fan. I followed you through. I hope, I remember reading the lyrics, Don't Pay the Ferryman, and going, ooh, is he the Grim Reaper? Is he not? I mean, for instance, was he the Grim Reaper?
What I had in Ferryman was a combination of mythological things happening. So I'm going to take you on a short movie here. You're watching a film and it's nighttime and there's a moon, and suddenly a rider comes from the left and he's got this cloak billowing behind him. He's going at a hell of a speed, and you can see the clouds. There's the moon between the trees and all that. And suddenly he comes to the edge of a huge ravine, and the horse goes, raises itself, and instead of going over the edge, and he looks down, and the moon is dappling on the water, and he looks down and he sees a cloak figure, and that's Charon. They used to put the pennies on the eyes of the dead. And this is a moment of destiny. He knows that he has to do this. He doesn't know why, but it's a moment, like we all reach in our lives, a moment of destiny. We have to do this. So he goes down and he goes up, and the guy's got the hood, and he climbs on the boat, and halfway across, the ferryman says, now you've got to pay me. And there's thunder and lightning and there's skeletons dancing on the water. And he said, no, you've got to get me to the other side first. So what I loved about this is the sudden ending. Don't pay the ferryman. You don't know, you kind of think, what the hell was that all about? Sorry about the bad word. But the same thing.
Where do we go when we die? What's your take on that? Where do we go when we pass away?
I think there's two things could happen. The one I favor is absolute oblivion. It's like when you fall asleep, but you're not dreaming, and your body just gives up the ghost. I think that's one thing. And I know that we as sensible and thinking human beings would like it to be otherwise, but eternal life, no, that's not for me. No, thank you very much. That would be pretty terrible. It could be that we've had so many people with visions that they've had of reaching a certain point, and that there's people who've gone before reaching for the hand. This, for me, it sounds like a thing in your brain that's already pre-programmed from birth that allows you to get through the trauma of dying. The facilitates, it goes through this sort of dream sequence as we disappear into the future. I was brought up in a castle, and I've experienced poltergeists and felt the spirits and stuff. So we don't actually know what the hell goes on. But you know something, John? I think there is a sixth dimension. We are energy. One thing I've learned about this whole COVID mess is that it's those people who say, no, I'm not going to get vaccinated, they think they've got a different body set up than the rest of us. This is rubbish. We have the same cellular structure in all of us, identical. Apart from men and women, there's slight differences, but we are made of cells and atoms and molecules. There might be something about this, the way this energy survives, that does bring us into a new dimension. One day I thought maybe we're little like drops of water going into a massive ocean, and then we get collected and put into another soul to go forward with another human being. Who knows? We'll all find out.
Spanish Train. How did you come up with that? What were you? Who was the man who wrote that? What was going on with you?
I was during the making of my first album, Far Beyond These Castle Walls. I was invited by my producer and his Portuguese girlfriend to go and stay with them for 3 weeks in Portugal. They had to have a break, so I went down there, and where they wanted me to stay was kind of pretty miserable. So I saw this. I'm going to go to Spain because I was brought up in South America, and I did speak fluent Spanish then. And I got on a train, and this was during the era of Franco and the repression. And I never forget being on. It was like surreal, and I don't know what I'd been on the night before, maybe a few beers, or I don't know what. But as we crossed the Guadalquivir River, I looked to my right, and there was a farmer up on the hill had got all these gnarled bits of wood that he'd put up as a fence. And as I went by, slowly, by the way, I thought, God, that's like skeletons dancing, like, whoa. And then I suddenly thought, there's the train driver's a skeleton. And then the whole thing began to emerge. And I wrote down in my book that I had with me, there's a Spanish train that runs between Guadalquivir and old Seville. At dead of night, the whistle blows and people hear she's running still. That's the first thing. And when I got home to my place in London, I then went into all the stuff that I knew from the past. For example, John Milton's Paradise Lost, where the devil was originally an archangel, and he was chucked out of heaven, and he's lying there in the flames of hell and glaring up. Actually, reminds me a bit of Donald Trump. He's glaring back, and he wants to get up there again, back to where he believes he should be. And that's a very powerful song, and at least a poem, an image. And then what else did I have on that one? I went through a lot of poker. I used to play poker a little bit, and I had to get the absolute card thing right. But you know what? It's all about the constant fight in all of us between good and evil, in a universal way and in a personal way. And that's where it came. I've been writing stuff before that. I mean, ridiculous stuff like Star-Spangled Tangerine See-Through Topless Trousers. Because I realized from the start, singing in a restaurant, which was my first paid gig, nobody listens to you unless if you start a story and they get it, they listen through the whole thing.
Well said. Well said. What about the poltergeist? Like you said, what did that come out? What was that experience?
Glasses smashed in the night. Things that happened. Cards that were set out on the table, stacked up again. Just extraordinary. They often say poltergeists are caused by the energy given out by possibly young girls, 13, 14, or young men of that sort of age. That kind of thing happened, and you kind of get the feeling. I mean, this castle originally was started 800 years ago, and then in the 1500s they built most of what exists today. But you were just talking just about religion. You know, this is an area that it's a bit like, are you vaccinated or not vaccinated? Of course, there's divisions and stuff. But for me, I don't know why a man wearing a white sort of garbing robe and having read a lot of stuff and read the Bible a few times, why he knows more about the afterlife than me, because or anybody. So I'm a bit like you. I was never a Catholic. I'm a Protestant by upbringing, and I would respect anybody's religion. But nevertheless, you've got to ask, how the heck do they know all that stuff? They don't. A little boy in Mumbai is as important a spirit and a soul as the Pope. That's my feeling about it.
Yeah, well said. I agree with you. The Lady in Red. How much did that change? I mean,
The Lady in Red, you see, I know that it changed things for me, but it was just, to be perfectly honest, I was writing for an album called Into the Light, and you mentioned Danny McBride and Glenn Morrow and lovely people from Canada, my Canadian band. we were doing huge concerts. We were doing football stadiums, 50,000. I think the biggest one we did was in the Hockenheim Formula One Grand Prix ring, and that was 120,000 people. And I was co-headlining a weekend with Prince and Rod Stewart and Tina Turner. That was the stature I was at. And during the writing of that album, I thought, I got to have a gentle song. There's too many rock songs, like Last Night, Say Goodbye to a Dawn Song. And I'd written a song for my daughter, Rosanna, who'd just been born. And that was a gentle piano thing. And one day I'm sat at my piano going, never seen you looking. That's interesting. The word never really struck me. And then I'm actually amazed that it's had the duration and legs that it has, because some people hate it. No, that's fine. There's lots of songs I hate, which are successful. But what it did was it opened a door to the rest of my catalog. You're talking about Spanish Train and Ferryman. People who'd never heard of those things before, suddenly they can go into that guy's catalog and say, "Whoa, this is interesting stuff." Or maybe it's not for them, but it was to this day. I mean, not only in Canada but in America, they haven't a clue who I am, but they certainly know Lady in Red.
Yeah.
And worldwide, everywhere. Amazing.